This is Warren Vanderhill with the Center for Middletown Studies project on Muncie Faith Communities. The date is December 13, 2016, and today I'm speaking with Josh Brandt, the pastor of The Gathering. I want to thank you for your willingness to participate in our project. I'd like to begin by having you tell me a little about your own faith journey, how you came to be a pastor.
Yes, thanks for asking, Warren. I have a unique faith journey in that I was actually baptized in the Catholic Church at 4 weeks old, almost 42 years ago. The candles are in my home office from that time, and my earliest memories are from hearing the Amen sung in worship in the stone walls of a church in Painesville, Ohio. But I joke that at really little, like 4 years old, I was telling my parents I wanted to be a priest. And so I said they wanted grandchildren, so there were other reasons we left the Catholic Church, but I think that was at least in the discussion. So we were involved in a fast-growing Presbyterian church in Florida for about 5 years. And when my parents divorced, moved back to Ohio, and it was at an evangelical Friends Church in the suburbs of Cleveland where I really came to faith. I always had faith as part of my life, and then experienced my call to ministry at a camp after my freshman year of high school. We had this time for 20 minutes of silence, just off by yourself, and that's when I really felt the call to full-time ministry, although the evidence had been there. When I was about 6, I was sitting at the dinner table and announced to my parents that I wanted to be a reader, and they were totally confused because I was already reading in school. And our pastor's name at the time was Harry Reeder, and I was convinced you changed your last name. And so it took some time to figure that out for them, but it's part of my story. Is it's always been a possibility for me. You know, it was, even as a little kid, you know, I wanted to be a policeman, like every little boy does at some point. But the ministry for me was always a possibility and always a probability.
How did you come into this position at The Gathering, to be more specific about the here?
Absolutely. So I was pastoring a church on the southwest side of Indianapolis, and God had just changed a lot of my thinking during that 7 years. So my wife and I were praying and talking a lot, and I just knew my time there was ending. It didn't have to. I could have just kept going. And so in our tribe, in the Church of God, they try not to call it a denomination. So our state pastor gave me a call and said, I know about this church in Muncie. And honestly, for the church here, they'd experienced 7 years of losing 11 to 17% of attendance each year.
Where were they located then?
They were, the year before I came, they bought this property, but for the 7 years before that, they were nomads. There's actually a spot on the website where you would have to go and check.
Oh, okay.
And so most of the time they were at the convention center. But if the convention center was booked, they would be at Cornerstone or one of the high schools.
Yeah.
And so I got that call, came here, and I think for the church and for myself, it was a little bit of, we've tried everything else. It hasn't worked in my life or in the church's life. So let's try to figure this out together.
Was the church you speak of in Indianapolis a traditional congregation, or was it much like this?
It wasn't. It was maybe in the middle, and maybe that's a lot of the tension. I had started there as worship pastor. My first 4 years there, I was worship pastor, and then transitioned into senior pastor. But it was more traditional in terms of what the congregation wanted. We were trying to change things, but we would sing 7 songs, and if 4 of them weren't traditional hymns, there was if not conversation, there were some looks on some faces.
Blowback.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What do you see as your main responsibilities here?
Now, for me, it's visioning. Where are we going, and not necessarily where are we going tomorrow. It's the thinking 2 to 3 years down the road. It's leading the pastors and the rest of the staff and our leadership teams, and preaching and teaching.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I try to focus. That's where I flourish. That's what's best for the church. So when I get off of those 3 things for too long, we all feel it.
Okay. How would you characterize the condition of the gathering right now?
Healthy. It's been hard fought over these last 9 years. We've experienced a lot of good things over the last 4 years. We're averaging over the last 3 or 4 years over 30 baptisms a year, and that lets us know that the people who are coming have been far from God and are now near to Him. We celebrate life transformation whenever it happens, and so that's for us how we know. And it used to be the average before those 40 was like 1.5 a year. So it's been a significant change for us. It's not like we've had 30 baptisms for the last 17 years.
So you would certainly characterize this as a growing congregation.
Yes, this last year, and it's surprising to us, we're still trying to understand it. We've experienced growth for the last 5 years, but this last year has been 21% growth, and we know that's not normal. That's not normal for us, even when I talk about growth in the past. So it's a new experience for all of us.
Who are these people? I mean, give me a kind of breakdown of the congregation.
The gathering is multi-generational. We have, the way we talk about it now is we have people who are living life in 10 decades. We have people from 96 years old to 6 months old.
Right.
They tend to be, for the gathering, one of our uniquenesses is we probably average post-grad in education. Even with all our college students are working towards a college degree.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of growth for us in college-age students, but also young families. Our largest group, our largest decade are those who are 4 to 11 years old.
Oh.
So they have to have parents somewhere. They don't just show up on their own.
So when you look at other traditional churches that are in a situation where they have declining membership, if I were just to bump into you on the street and give you a quick, why do you think that is? What would be your quick response?
I think it's losing the focus on mission. That churches who are declining understandably become inward focused instead of outward focused.
Okay.
It becomes about our needs. How do we survive? In a church of 40 people, it's understandable. They're in survival mode.
Right.
Instead of saying, okay, it's about loving our neighbors. It's about caring for others. It's about advancing the kingdom. And it's hard to tell people who are worried about keeping the lights on that they need to get the focus off of themselves.
Aside from membership, what do you think are the key challenges that this congregation faces?
Yes, one's adjusting the growth, and some of that is, we face the challenge of finances. When we look at some benchmarks, national averages of churches our size, what giving should be, we're about maybe 2/3 of that. And some of that has to do with the economics of Delaware County. Some of that has to do with because it's growth of people who haven't been in church in their lives. They're not used to giving. That's one. And then as we continue working discipleship, we know that we are best. You walk in the door to your baptism. And so we're trying to get better at the ongoing care and discipleship in someone's life.
Yeah, when you speak of the sacramental part of this or the
Mm.
creedal part of this,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of relationship do you really have with the Church of God,
Mm-hmm.
Anderson?
Yes. So in the Church of God, every congregation is autonomous, which creates a whole set of strengths and weaknesses. I'm not autonomous.
Mhm.
I'm held accountable because I'm ordained through the Church of God. So the relationship is voluntary, and we are involved because of the accountability. And we do believe there's some things that we're better when we're together. And so we've worked over the last 4 or 5 years in particular to develop those relationships by our staff, volunteering with the Church of God and being connected that way.
And that kind of connects to the next question, which is to expand out a little bit. What role do you see for your church in what I would call the wider community?
The wider community of Delaware County?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Well, you can go beyond that if you want to, but we're
Yeah.
focusing specifically
Sure.
on Delaware County because the next thing we'll ask about is effects of economic decline and social
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, we desire to see community transformation. When we were getting ready to move here, we were having a garage sale like you do, moving sale, and people kept asking my wife, where are you moving to and why? And even though it was 9.5 years ago, we remember somebody said, oh, you're moving to Muncie. Muncie is gray.
Yeah.
And that just stuck with us as a matter of prayer and focus is how do we as a church change that? You know, even if we don't have that perception living here, if people outside of here have that perception, that it just works against everything we're trying to do. And it feels like as I've lived here most of the last decade, that's what happens. Is, you know, we see something in the news and we say, of course. You know, I have friends who repeatedly say, well, that's so Muncie. And they don't mean that as a good thing. So we do believe we have to be a voice for the truth. We have to be the voice for better. And then we also have to take action with that. We haven't been able to in this last year, but the previous 7 years, we've taken a Sunday off in the summer to work with some of our partners. But we also believe in not recreating. We want to work with the organizations in our community, like Habitat and other groups, because we have the manpower
Right.
and we have the influence. So we see ourselves as influencers who are working for the good.
Okay. As you're well aware, in the last few decades,
Yes.
Muncie's experienced considerable economic and social change. What we've called on these projects we've done deindustrialization. In what ways have those kinds of changes impacted your church?
Yeah, it's led to, it's almost like in parts of our church, a group depression at times.
Okay.
You know, we do have people from neighborhoods. You know, I go to visit them, and as soon as I get to the edge of the neighborhood, I know like this was a Borg Warner neighborhood,
Okay.
or this was a GM neighborhood,
Right.
and they're living their lives in the midst of that, looking back at happier times when they felt their futures were secure, and now they don't. I think most of our people had transitioned away from those jobs, so that a lot of the economic issues in the last 5 to 7 years haven't impacted them the same. It just felt to them, I think, like more of the same.
Okay.
So there's almost a malaise at times, and we work to speak against that, but it's just so deep.
Yeah. How is your church involved in what we're calling the economic and social life of the community?
And what helped me?
Well, I mean, when you think of the larger community and the way the industrial patterns have changed so much, some churches really get involved in what I would call the plight of the people who are part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm looking more for the
Sure.
outreach
Yes.
mission and the way you see the work of the gathering
Sure.
fitting into that context.
Part of our reality is because we're on the, we affectionately call this area North Muncie.
Yeah, it's pretty north.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Our hope is that eventually on Google Maps you'll go, oh,
Yeah, right.
where'd North Muncie come from?
Yeah.
We just created it. And so a lot of our people coming from like the Delta School District,
Right.
or we pull people from about 25 minutes in every direction, they don't live in those realities. And so part of my job and our job is to turn their attention in their busyness, in their full lives, to say, everybody isn't living like you're living. There are kids in Whiteley who've never been on Ball State's campus.
Yeah.
And so one, raising the awareness, getting people out of their cocoons or getting their blinders off, but then giving them opportunities to develop relationships. We've done that better in the past. And some of that has come from, we're really committed to being where we're invited and never taking over. We were really close with the church in industry for about the first 5 years that I was here, and developing those relationships, but that kind of went through its life. But for a lot of our people, they're involved. It's one of the things that we're excited. We don't have to say get involved because they're already involved.
Right. Yeah.
But getting them to see that their involvement is more than just going to fundraisers,
Yeah.
more than just writing checks,
Yeah.
but getting to know people whose lives are very different than theirs.
As the pastor, do you see this congregation as a diverse congregation?
No.
And that's not. I'm not just
No.
talking about race.
No.
There's.
It is pretty. There's some diversity, but it's just not great. And because of my own story and my own family, I tend to look for diversity. So we are mostly middle to upper middle class.
Right.
We're mostly people who aren't living in the city, but that's not everybody. So diverse in experience, diverse in what somebody's brokenness is, but maybe
Oh, okay.
because we believe in vulnerability and sharing your story, we tend to know about a lot of people's stories. But yeah, not as diverse as I would love.
Okay.
Is the way I would say it.
Are there any programs that your church has begun to specifically respond to the community's economic dislocation?
No.
Okay.
I think that mostly that warrants because like our jobless rate as a church is so low. So like I said, it's not something we experience. So it's not where we're a church. So if our unemployment rate even matched what the average was,
Right.
I think that would grow out of our intentionality for our own people and then for the people in our community. Sometimes it's difficult to create ministries when you don't understand it or live
Okay.
it.
So if you think of an unemployment rate
Mhm.
in this local area right now, say around 5-6%, that
Mhm.
would not be true of your congregation.
No, I think it's probably 1%.
Okay. Okay. Do you plan to look at doing some programming in that area?
Yeah, we've come through a season where we've been restructuring. It's totally uninteresting when that happens. So our hope is in the next year, what we're really praying about too is we cannot expect people to come to us. So we're praying and thinking about being a church with multiple locations.
Oh.
That's one of the things that we've been talking about for a couple years, so that we can live shoulder to shoulder and partner with those who are experiencing the economic hardship. And we do, it's not that nobody comes and nobody calls, but a lot of that is triage. And we would rather be in the community development, as some of the churches you're talking to,
Right, yeah.
who have their front door,
Yeah, like Urban Life.
is right there.
Yeah.
And so, in the last year, we felt like some of our role is to hold like churches like Urban Light up, to support them how we can, because they're always going to be better isn't the right word. They're always going to be able to accomplish those things because they're there, and we're not.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it is being there rather than being out on North Walnut, near Highway 28. Do you work with any other churches or organizations on those kinds of programs?
No, I've found, this is just in my 20 years of experience and conversations that I've had, that Muncie, as far as the churches, is the most splintered place I've been. And so when I talk to pastors I know in other communities, and so even in the Church of God Anderson, there are 7 churches in this county.
Right.
The last time there was an effort to get them all together was 9 years ago.
Yeah, okay.
And part of our core identity for 100 and some
Yeah.
years was holiness and unity.
Yeah.
So if a group of people who say they're unified don't even get
Yeah.
together, it's very common for someone to say, "Hey, have you heard of Pastor so-and-so?" That I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
So I may be stating the
yeah.
obvious, so it's fair to say that there isn't a great deal of cooperation
No.
among the churches in Delaware County.
Right. Yeah, there's, I've heard 160, 170. And there's been some efforts interpersonally, but I'll even hear about someone say, "Oh, we get together once a month. There's like 10 of us." I'm like, "Where?"
Right, yeah.
I'd love to be there, or
Yeah.
how can I be a part of that? And
Yeah.
so it's surprised me.
What role do you see for churches and faith communities in cultivating what I call a sense of citizenship among their members? That it's important for people to be concerned with what I guess I would call the public interest.
Yes. So when I came to this church, it was called First Church of God, East Central Indiana. So coming from Central Indiana and Indianapolis, I was a little confused. I didn't understand that was actually. I made some jokes about that, and they're like, "No, this is East Central Indiana." I go, "It doesn't make sense to me."
Right.
And so we knew we had to do the work of creating that focus, because I found that if we say East Central Indiana, what does that mean? So we do believe in people being involved. That's everything from calling everybody to vote
Yeah, okay.
to calling people to understand what's going on in our city. Very regularly, we're talking about, not just talking about, but calling people to read the paper, to know what's happening in the neighborhoods, to understand what's going on in our schools. And because the gathering, I would say, where she is diverse, is in political opinion.
Okay.
And so there are some people that I would rather just not be involved personally,
Right.
from my perspective, but it is that involved, to be engaged in your neighborhood, to be engaged in community groups, to be engaged by going to school board meetings, to be active in what is happening. Yeah. We can't just go from here, go home, shut our doors, and pretend.
Do you think there's a connection between faith and citizenship?
I do. I am only, I come from a family that was disengaged. My stepfather has never voted, and says, then I don't complain. I'm not sure if that's 100% true.
Yeah.
But for me, because my faith causes me to be concerned for the greater good, I'm not just focused on my elementary school. That's why it was important. And I know people make different choices, but for us, that our girls would be in Muncie City Schools,
Okay.
so that we're actively involved. We're a voice.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting a very good education too. It's not a loss for them.
Right.
But we want, it's not just to be seen, we want to be a part of that community.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me comes out of faith. It's why for years, until I got too busy, I coached youth soccer
Yeah.
in the city rec league, because of being connected with kids. That's about my faith. Like, I'm not talking about Jesus the whole time. We're talking about how to kick a soccer ball. But I don't. Without faith, for me, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, I know that I would be isolated.
Well, when we talk about that connection between faith and citizenship, this is a pretty blunt question.
Sure.
Do you preach it?
Yes, we did a series, even our series about Jesus this year, and our series about faith and politics last year, just telling people that we should be involved, that we have a voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's a voice for the voiceless.
Okay.
Because as our church and our community does continue to grow, we can stand with those who have been quieted.
Yeah.
And so I believe that we have an opportunity and obligation to speak against those in power when they're using their power incorrectly.
Okay. When you think of your congregation, then, I mean, when you preach that,
Mm-hmm.
do you get any blowback on it?
No. I think there's a lot of assuming at times. My favorite is when people, like I said, on the political spectrum, come and talk and think I'm on their side.
Right. Yeah.
Either way. And so we do have some politicians that do attend here. We do have people who know that I'm really clear. Our hope is not in the system.
Right.
Our hope is in Jesus.
Yeah.
And we do preach that very clearly. But that doesn't, it's not our hope is in Jesus, so we ignore the system.
Okay.
That's kind of, I think, what I grew up with was, let's just stay isolated in this community of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we're okay, it doesn't matter if the world around us is getting worse.
Okay.
What we say
Right.
is we're experiencing joy, we're experiencing salvation, we're experiencing hope. Now we have to make sure that spreads.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What kinds of activities in the context of missionary outreach are you involved with?
So the gathering has had a history of what we call as a commitment to radical generosity. And it is part of our story with the economic downturn. Is our church started in 99 giving 20% financially, and then in 2009 we had to cut that to 10%.
Okay.
Now we're back to 20%, and so we have supported agencies and work locally, nationally, and internationally throughout that history. Now we focus on 6 strategic partnerships.
Okay.
2 of those are missionary couples who are working in the post-Christian world in Europe. A couple who's working in Germany, and then a couple who are supporting now who are in England, where things have radically. It's a community of 17,000 with 4 evangelical churches.
Mm-hmm.
Partly to help us understand, as the context continues to change here, that we can learn from them. And then we do believe one of my heart cries is human trafficking. And so we have partnered with Pink Door in Berlin, which has, Berlin in Europe has become the hotbed because of legalization of prostitution. So they have 200 beds that women can come out of prostitution. And then in the States and in this area with Strip Love, which started in Anderson, was working in Muncie for a while, but thankfully our strip club closed. And what they do is they go in, it's women who go in, love and care for women who don't think there's another option.
Okay.
And that is something, and again, it's a little bit how it works here is while we're supporting them financially and talking about them.
Mhm.
We have 6 or 7 women in our church who are part of that ministry. Now, they're not walking in wearing a gathering
Right.
name badge, but
Yeah.
we have a board member, prayer team members for Strip Love, and some women who regularly go into the strip clubs in Anderson.
Okay.
And it's kind of been our story.
Yeah.
Is we want to highlight as much as we can so that somebody sticks.
Mhm.
Because if it matters to them personally, they're going to get involved so much more than us having a sign-up list.
Okay. A couple of macro questions.
Mm-hmm.
How do you account for the decline in membership of the mainline Protestant churches in this country?
Yeah, I think that just like a big freight liner, it's harder for them to turn. So in the Church of God, our tribe, it's just smaller. So what I've noticed is unless you can jump and be either what's perceived highly successful or highly creative, if you're in a mainline denomination, somebody's going to come and say, stop that.
Okay.
That's just at least the impression.
Okay.
We're so small, and our leadership at the state and national level is so small, they wouldn't know if we made changes. And so that allows us to change with culture if that was our goal. Our goal is to change, to create culture and to change ahead of culture. Our role as a church. So I think that there's that. There's also, I don't think it's as big as some of the research says, but the Church of God Anderson is so small, we don't have bad press.
Yeah, true.
You know, so if at our national meeting, they're talking about, for instance, marriage and who should get married, it doesn't hit any national paper.
Right.
Whereas a mainline denomination, that's on the 6 o'clock news.
Yeah, if the Presbyterians do
Yes,
it, it's on 6 o'clock.
exactly. And so I don't think that's fair, because I believe that some of our more established and mainline churches have had a presence in this community for so long that their voice is richer. It has a depth to it. And so I think it's been an unwillingness to, I think, realize things are changing. And they are.
Yeah.
And it amazes me. I've been in ministry 22 years, and a lot of our staff here is younger. And so I'll just tell them, and they just look at me like, it used to be like, what?
Yeah. What planet are you on?
Yeah, and that's only 20 years of history.
Well, let me flip this around then. How do you account for the rise of the mega churches then?
My hope is, Warren, that it's because people know they were created for a purpose. They want to live that out, and they want to be successful at it. And so that is attractive when things are done well. That's my hope. I think a lot of it, though, is what we have access to and available to us, even at home. I'm one of those changes in 20 years. I remember working at a church that was still kind of stuck. They're like, well, we have TVs in our youth room. Well, they were old CRT TVs, and every one of those kids at home had a 42 or 55-inch flat screen. They walk into a church, and there's a 27-inch color television that they don't even know how to turn on. And so because of the internet, we can look and see worship that's high quality. We can hear teaching. That happens to me. I'll go home and did I do a good job or something? And I'm on social media, and people here are quoting national preachers I didn't even know they knew about.
Yeah.
And I think it's there's something about being around a bunch of people, if they know even some of the same things. That if you can be sitting with 1,000 people and they're all singing, that's hard to beat.
What do you think the appeal is as we sit in this lovely church of this kind of service?
Yeah, even our room, and we've heard this, it's not a trigger. So we have some people who were really wounded by churches, and what they've told us is the lack of familiarity doesn't cause them to go back into that stuff, whatever it is. Whereas I can go into a church that has wood pews and it feels almost comfortable because there's a familiarity to me. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who've been disenfranchised or they walked away from the church. And so when they come in and it doesn't look like a church, it's more comfortable for them. It allows them to let their guards down. Mm-hmm. And so we believe it is because of vulnerability that we are working to get rid of shame whenever we can. And we hope that it's not just a pursuit of excellence. We do pursue excellence, but our hope is that everyone encounters God.
Okay.
And so as we tell the stories, and it's not just my stories, it's not just our worship pastor stories. When we're telling the stories of people who have come here, found faith, found Jesus, whose lives have been changed, that is attractive. Mm-hmm. That's what, for many years, the debate in churches was if you're going to be attractional or missional. And what was lost is churches should be attractive. They should be places that you want to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people say that they've found, that this is a thin place where they feel heaven and earth colliding. And this is a place where they can be honest about themselves and real. And we hope that we're also doing a good job.
Well, this may be too small a question, but I think you have great expertise here, and that is you're a musician. Mm-hmm. What role in this kind of service does the music play?
Yeah, for us, they're really intertwined, and some of that is my history, being a worship pastor, and I still do play in our band about 10 times a year. Mm-hmm. When I was a worship pastor, I would beg the pastor to tell me what he was going to speak on. I would have band practice or choir practice on a Wednesday night, and he would tell me Thursday afternoon what he's speaking on Sunday. Oh, okay. So we plan, right now I'm planning all the next year. All of our team has the themes, has the scripture, has the big idea. And so for Leo and I, it's a constant conversation. What about this song? Mm-hmm. If we sing this song right before the teaching, I know I can speak out of that. And so it informs each other. The worship informs my teaching and preaching, and my teaching and preaching informs the worship. So we really think about it as the first and second act of a 3-act.
Okay. You actually use the word act?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, and they have to go together. You can't be if you were sitting in a movie, it got to act 2, and all of a sudden you're talking about something completely different. Right. It would not only be confusing, it just doesn't go together. And so we're always talking about what can we do to keep that flow, to keep the conversation going, and to keep the dialogue between the two.
So the continuity is really important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know usually by Wednesday, I'm in the loop. And so all of our band, it's the technology part, has an app that has all the songs so they can be playing and listening. Okay. Even when I'm not in the band, I'm doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. And that's been planned out of a conversation Leo and I have had before that. So there's a lot of interplay, and some of it doesn't get noticed. We notice.
So for the uninitiated, it's just not a lot of wailing.
yeah, absolutely. So but if you've been singing about freedom, and then I'm talking about freedom,
right.
Even for the person not connecting those dots, our hearts and minds are connecting those dots. Yeah. So we believe in the preparation makes room for the Spirit. So we work very hard to be as prepared as we can be, and then to get out of the way.
Okay. Well, those are the only formal questions I have. But I want to give you an opportunity to add anything that you think might fit in that we might not have covered.
Yeah, I've just found, as I pray for our community, that it's surprising in the Midwest, in a community with this history, how underchurched we are. So even when you mentioned mega churches,
Yeah.
everything that I've read, everyone I talk to, kind of the community expectation is we should have a church of 5,000 in our community, and probably 4 or 5 churches over 1,000.
Mm-hmm. True.
And that's not true. You know, we have one church over 1,000,
Right.
barely, like
Right.
hanging on, and
Right.
ebbs and flows.
Right.
And so that has been one of those things that we've had to re-educate ourselves as a church. You know, when I first came here 9 years ago, if you talk, well, everybody goes to church.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, maybe about a quarter
Yeah. True.
of the people go to church.
Right.
And so I've just always surprised by that. Even as I look at big community events, you know, like the community Christmas thing
Yeah.
in December, that has faith as one of the focuses.
Mm-hmm.
And so there seems to be this desire for it to be true about us.
Mm-hmm.
And then but it's not really.
Mhm.
And so we're still trying to investigate that gap.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a multiple decade figure out.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, if you look out from where you are now,
Mm-hmm.
you know, around 400 plus
Mhm.
members, and if I were to say, which I am, how do you see this congregation in a decade?
Yeah, we're asking that same question. And that's where, do we want to create a monolith here at the corner of 3 and 28
Right.
that's really saying, hey, come to us?
Yeah.
There's some of that that's very familiar. But my heart is, if 10 years from now, this could be one of 4 or 5 churches that have the same DNA,
Oh, okay.
that have the same heart, that have similar culture. I'm not a fan of, personally, it's not Joshua's face on screens in 5 churches. That's not what it's about. It's having the campus pastor who's speaking on the same thing but in their voice. That's ideally what we think this area needs, particularly as we think about other parts of Muncie. You know, I rented someone's house who lived on the northwest side of Muncie, but they moved because the wife was teaching in Cowan. And we forget that's a 15, 20-minute
Yeah.
drive.
Sure.
And so we prayed about which areas, what makes sense. And then there are smaller communities in outlying areas that have just a unique culture of their own. And so how do we speak into those places? That's what I would love to see 10 years from now. I'd love to see this kind of stay
Yeah.
at this size. A lot of what we read that wouldn't happen. When you tend to grow in other places, growth happens here. But that this place is continually sending out, you know, so that every year or two we're saying, hey, we need 75 people to go to the south side of Muncie, or go downtown Muncie, or go towards Hartford City. Yeah, that would be ideal.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I think this is a very, very interesting congregation, and you're making an important contribution.
Thank you.